My course was very plain now, after that bit of reflection. All I had to do was to go over to Belgium and impress the Shah. I failed to form any definite plan as to the process, but I made up my mind to manage it somehow. I said to myself, I will impress 30 for this Shah, or there shall be a funeral that will be worth contemplating. I went to bed then, but did not sleep a great deal, for the responsibilities were weighing pretty heavily upon me. At 6 o'clock in the morning Mr. Blank came and turned me out. I was surprised at this, and not gratified, for I detest early rising. I never like to say severe things, but I was a good deal tried this time. I said I did not mind getting up moderately early, but I hated to be called day before yesterday. However, as I was acting in a national capacity, and for a country that I liked, I stopped grumbling and we set out. A grand naval review is a good thing to impress a Shah with, but if he would try getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, but no matter, we started. We took the Dover train and went whistling along over the housetops at the rate of 50 miles an hour, and just as smoothly and pleasantly, too, as if we were in a sleigh. One never can have anything but a very vague idea of what speed is until he travels over an English railway. Our lightning expresses are sleepy and indolent by comparison. We looked into the back windows of the endless ranks of houses abreast and below us, and saw many a home-like little family of early birds sitting at their breakfasts. New views and new aspects of London were about me. The mighty city seemed to spread farther and wider in the clear morning air than it had ever done before. There is something awe-inspiring about the mere look of the figures that express the population of London when one comes to set them down in a Goularge hand 400000. It takes a body's breath away, almost. We presently left the city behind. We had started drowsy, but we did not stay so. How could we, with the brilliant sunshine pouring down, the balmy wind blowing through the open windows, and the Garden of Eden spread all abroad? We swept along through rolling expanses of growing grain, not a stone or a stump to mar their comeliness, not an unsightly fence or an ill-kept hedge. Through broad meadows covered with fresh green grass as clean swept as if a broom had been at work, their little brooks wandering up and down them, noble trees here and there, cows in the shade, groves in the distance, and church spires projecting out of them. And there were the quaintest old-fashioned houses set in the midst of smooth lawns or partly hiding themselves among fine old forest trees. And there was one steep-roofed ancient cottage whose walls all around, and whose roof, and whose chimneys were clothed in a shining mail of ivy leaves. So thoroughly indeed that only one little patch of roof was visible to prove that the house was not a mere house of leaves, with glass windows in it. Imagine those dainty little homes surrounded by flowering shrubs and bright green grass and all sorts of old trees, and then go on and try to imagine something more bewitching. By and by we passed Rochester, and sure enough, right there, on the highest ground in the town, and rising imposingly up from among clustering roofs, was the gray old castle, roofless, ruined, ragged, the sky beyond showing clear and blue through the 36 glassless windows, the walls partly clad with ivy, a time-scarred, weather-beaten old pile, but ever so picturesque and ever so majestic, too. There it was, a whole book of English history. I had read of Rochester Castle 1,000 times, but I had never really believed there was any such building before. Presently we reached the sea and came to a stand far out on a pier, and here was Dover and more history. The chalk cliffs of England towered up from the shore, and the French coast was visible. On the tallest hill sat Dover Castle, stately and spacious and superb, looking just as it has always looked any time these 10 or 15,000 years. I do not know its exact age, and it does not matter anyway. We stepped aboard the little packet and steamed away. The sea was perfectly smooth and painfully brilliant in the sunshine. There were no curiosities in the vessel except the passengers and a placard in French setting forth the transportation fares for various kinds of people. The lithographer probably considered that placard a triumph. It was printed in green, blue, red, black, and yellow, no individual line in one color, even the individual letters were separately colored. For instance, the first letter of a word would be blue, the next red, the next green, and so on. The placard looked as if it had the smallpox or something. I inquired the artist's name and place of business, intending to hunt him up and kill him when I had time, but no one could tell me. In the list of prices, first-class passengers were set down at 15 shillings and 4 pence, and dead bodies 37 at £1 10 shillings and 8 pence, just double price. That is Belgian morals, I suppose. I never say a harsh thing unless I am greatly stirred. But in my opinion, the man who would take advantage of a dead person would do almost any odious thing. I published this scandalous discrimination against the most helpless class among us in order that people intending to die abroad may come back by some other line. We skimmed over to Ostend in 4 hours and went ashore. The first gentleman we saw happened to be the flag lieutenant of the fleet, and he told me where the Lively lay and said she would sail about 6 in the morning. Heavens and earth. He said he would give my letter to the proper authority, and so we thanked him and bore away for the hotel. Bore away is good sailor phraseology, and I have been at sea portions of 2 days now. I easily pick up a foreign language. Ostend is a curious, comfortable-looking, massively built town, where the people speak both the French and the Flemish with exceeding fluency, and yet I could not understand them in either tongue. But I will write the rest about Ostend in tomorrow's letter. We idled about this curious Ostend the remainder of the afternoon and far into the long-lived twilight, apparently to amuse ourselves, but secretly I had a deeper motive. I wanted to see if there was anything here that might impress the Shah. In the end, I was reassured and content. If Ostend could impress him, England could amaze the head clear off 38 his shoulders and have marvels left that not even the trunk could be indifferent to. These citizens of Flanders flounders, I think they call them, though I feel sure I have eaten a creature of that name, or seen it in an aquarium or a menagerie, or in a picture or somewhere, are a thrifty, industrious race, and are as commercially wise and farsighted as they were in Edward the Third's time, and as enduring and patient under adversity as they were in Charles the Bold's. They are prolific in the matter of children. In some of the narrow streets, every house seemed to have had a freshet of children, which had burst through and overflowed into the roadway. One could hardly get along for the pack of juveniles, and they were all soiled and all healthy. They all wore wooden shoes, which clattered noisily on the stone pavements. All the women were hard at work. There were no idlers about the houses. The men were away at labor, no doubt. In nearly every door women sat at needlework or something of that marketable nature. They were knitting principally. Many groups of women sat in the street, in the shade of walls, making point lace. The lace maker holds a sort of pillow on her knees with a strip of cardboard fastened on it, on which the lace pattern has been punctured. She sticks bunches of pins in the punctures, and about them weaves her web of threads. The numberless threads diverge from the bunch of pins like the spokes of a wheel, and the spools from which the threads are being unwound form the outer circle of the wheel. The woman throws these spools about her with flying fingers, in 39 and out, over and under one another, and so fast that you can hardly follow the evolutions with your eyes. In the chaos and confusion of skipping spools, you wonder how she can possibly pick up the right one every time, and especially how she can go on gossiping with her friends all the time, and yet never seem to miss a stitch. The laces these ingenious flounders were making were very dainty and delicate in texture, and very beautiful in design. Most of the shops in Ostend seemed devoted to the sale of seashells. All sorts of figures of men and women were made of shells. One sort was composed of grotesque and ingenious combinations of lobster claws in the human form, and they had other figures made of stuffed frogs, some fencing, some barbering each other, and some were not to be described at all without indecent language. It must require a barbarian nature to be able to find humor in such nauseating horrors as these last. These things were exposed in the public windows, where young girls and little children could see them, and in the shops sat the usual hairy-lipped young woman waiting to sell them. There was a contrivance attached to the better class of houses which I had heard of before, but never seen. It was an arrangement of mirrors outside the window, so contrived that the people within could see who was coming either up or down the street, see all that might be going on, in fact without opening the window or twisting themselves into uncomfortable positions in order to look. A capital thing to watch for unwelcome, or welcome, 40 visitors with, or to observe pageants in cold or rainy weather. People in second and third stories had, also, another mirror which showed who was passing underneath. The dining room at our hotel was very spacious and rather gorgeous. One end of it was composed almost entirely of a single pane of plate glass, some 2 inches thick, for this is the plate glass manufacturing region, you remember. It was very clear and fine. If one were to enter the place in such a way as not to catch the sheen of the glass, he would suppose that the end of the house was wide open to the sun and the storms. A strange boyhood instinct came strongly upon me, and I could not really enjoy my dinner. I wanted to break that glass so badly. I have no doubt that every man feels so, and I know that such a glass must be simply torture to a boy. This dining room's walls were almost completely covered with large oil paintings in frames. It was an excellent hotel. The utmost care was taken that everything should go right. I went to bed at 10 and was called at 11 to take the early train. I said I was not the one, So the servant stirred up the next door, and he was not the one. Then the next door and the next no success, and so on, till the reverberations of the knocking were lost in the distance down the hall, and I fell asleep again. They called me at 12 to take another early train, but I said I was not the one again, and asked as a favor that they would be particular to call the rest next time, but never mind me. However, they could not understand my English. They only said something in reply to signify that, and then went on banging up the boarders, none of whom desired to take the early train. When they called me at 1, it made my rest seem very broken, and I said if they would skip me at 2, I would call myself not really intending to do it, but hoping to beguile the porter and deceive him. He probably suspected that and was afraid to trust me, because when he made his rounds at that hour, he did not take any chances on me, but rooted me out along with the others. I got some more sleep after that, but when the porter called me at 3, I felt depressed and jaded and greatly discouraged. So I gave it up and dressed myself. The porter got me a cup of coffee and kept me awake while I drank it. He was a good, well-meaning sort of flounder, but really a drawback to the hotel, I should think. Poor Mr. Blank came in then, looking worn and old. He had been called for all the different trains, too, just as I had. He said it was a good enough hotel, but they took too much pains. While we sat there talking, we fell asleep and were called again at 4. Then we went out and dozed about town till 6, and then drifted aboard the Lively. She was trim and bright and clean and smart. She was as handsome as a picture. The sailors were in brand new man-o'-war costume, and plenty of officers were about the decks in the state uniform of the service cocked hats, huge epaulets, clawhammer coats lined with white silk hats, and coats and trousers all splendid with gold lace. I judged at these were all admirals, and so got afraid and went ashore again. Our vessel was to carry the Shah's brother, also the Grand Vizier, several Persian princes who were uncles to the Shah, and other dignitaries of more or less consequence. A vessel alongside was to carry the luggage, and a vessel just ahead, the Vigilant, was to carry nobody but just the Shah and certain ministers of state and servants and the Queen's special ambassador, Sir Henry Rawlinson, who is a Persian scholar and talks to the Shah in his own tongue. I was very glad, for several reasons, to find that I was not to go in the same ship with the Shah. First, with him not immediately under my eye, I would feel less responsibility for him. And secondly, as I was anxious to impress him, I wanted to practice on his brother first. The Shah's quarters. On the afterdeck of the Vigilant, very handsome ship, a temporary cabin had been constructed for the sole and special use of the Shah, temporary but charmingly substantial and graceful and pretty. It was about 30 feet long and 12 wide, beautifully gilded, decorated and painted within and without. Among its colors was a shade of light green, which reminds me of an anecdote about the Persian party, which I will speak of in tomorrow's letter. It was getting along toward the time for the Shah to arrive from Brussels, so I ranged up alongside my 43 own ship. I do not know when I ever felt so ill at ease and undecided. It was a sealed letter which I had brought from the Admiralty, and I could not guess what the purport of it might be. I supposed I was intended to command the ship, that is, I had supposed it at first, but after seeing all those splendid officers, I had discarded that idea. I cogitated a good deal, but to no purpose. Presently, a regiment of Belgian troops arrived and formed in line along the pier. Then a number of people began to spread down carpets for 50 yards along the pier, by the railway track, and other carpets were laid from these to the ships. The gangway leading on board my ship was now carpeted, and its railings were draped with bright-colored signal flags. It began to look as if I was expected, so I walked on board. A sailor immediately ran and stopped me, and made another sailor bring a mop for me to wipe my feet on, lest I might soil the deck, which was wonderfully clean and nice. Evidently, I was not the person expected after all. I pointed to the group of officers, and asked the sailor what the naval law would do to a man if he were to go and speak to some of those admirals for. There was an awful air of etiquette and punctilio about the premises. But just then one of those officers came forward, and said that if his instinct was correct, an Admiralty order had been received giving me a passage in the ship. And he also said that he was the first lieutenant, and that I was very welcome and he would take pains to make me feel at home, and furthermore there was champagne and soda waiting down below. And furthermore still, all the 44 London correspondents, to the number of 6 or 7, would arrive from Brussels with the Shah and would go in our ship. And if our passage were not a lively one, and a jolly and enjoyable one, it would be a very strange thing indeed. I could have jumped for joy if I had not been afraid of breaking some rule of naval etiquette and getting hanged for it. Now the train was signaled, and everybody got ready for the great event. The Belgian regiment straightened itself up, and some 200 flounders arrived and took conspicuous position on a little mound. I was a little afraid that this would impress the Shah, but I was soon occupied with other interests. The train of 13 cars came tearing in and stopped abreast the ships. Music and guns began an uproar. Odd-looking Persian faces and felt hats, brimless stovepipes, appeared at the car windows. Some gorgeous English officials fled down the carpet from the vigilant. They stopped at a long car with the royal arms upon it, uncovered their heads, and unlocked the car door. Then the Shah stood up in it and gave us a good view. He was a handsome, strong-featured man, with a rather European fairness of complexion. Had a mustache, wore spectacles, seemed of a good height and graceful build and carriage, and looked about 40 or a shade less. He was very simply dressed brimless stovepipe and close-buttoned dark green military suit, without ornament. No, not wholly without ornament, for he had a band 2 inches wide worn over his shoulder 45 and down across his breast, scarf fashion, which band was one solid glory of fine diamonds. A Persian official appeared in the Shah's rear and enveloped him in an ample quiltor cloak, if you please, which was lined with fur. The outside of it was of a whitish color and elaborately needleworked in Persian patterns like an India shawl. The Shah stepped out and the official procession formed about him and marched him down the carpet and on board the Vigilant to slow music. Not a flounder raised a cheer. All the small fry swarmed out of the train now. The Shah walked back alongside his fine cabin, looking at the assemblage of silent, solemn flounders. The correspondent of the London Telegraph was hurrying along the pier and took off his hat and bowed to the King of Kings, and the King of Kings gave a polite military salute in return. This was the commencement of the excitement. The success of the breathless telegraph man made all the other London correspondents mad, every man of whom flourished his stovepipe recklessly and cheered lustily, some of the more enthusiastic varying the exercise by lowering their heads and elevating their coattails. Seeing all this and feeling that if I was to impress the Shah at all, now was my time, I ventured a little squeaky yell, quite distinct from the other shouts, but just as hearty. His Shahship heard and saw and saluted me in a manner that was, I considered, an acknowledgment of my superior importance. I do not know that I ever felt so ostentatious and absurd before. All the correspondents came 46 aboard, and then the Persian baggage came also, and was carried across to the ship alongside of ours. When she could hold no more, we took somewhere about 100 trunks and boxes on board our vessel. 2 boxes fell into the water, and several sailors jumped in and saved one, but the other was lost. However, it probably contained nothing but a few £100 of diamonds and things. At last we got under way and steamed out through a long slip, the piers on either side being crowded with flounders, but never a cheer. A battery of 3 guns on the starboard pier boomed a royal salute, and we swept out to sea, the Vigilant in the lead, we right in her wake, and the baggage ship in ours. Within 15 minutes everybody was well acquainted. A general jollification set in, and I was thoroughly glad I had come over to fetch the Shah. Chapter 2. Mark Twain executes his contract and delivers. The Shah in London. London, June 19, 1873. Some Persian finery. Leaving Ostend, we went out to sea under a clear sky and upon smooth water, so smooth, indeed, that its surface was scarcely rippled. I say the sky was clear, and so it was, clear and sunny, but a rich haze lay upon the water, in the distance a soft, mellow mist, through which a scattering say or two loomed vaguely. One may call such a morning perfect. The corps of correspondents were well jaded with their railway journey, but after champagne and soda downstairs with the officers, everybody came up refreshed and cheery, and exceedingly well acquainted all around. The Persian grandees had meantime taken up a position in a glass house on the afterdeck, and were sipping coffee in a grave, oriental way. They all had much lighter complexions, and a more European cast of features than I was prepared for, and several of them were exceedingly handsome, fine-looking men. They all sat in a circle on a sofa, the deckhouse being circular, and they made a right gaudy spectacle. Their breasts were completely crusted with gold bullion embroidery of a pattern, resembling frayed and interlacing ferns, and they had large jeweled ornaments on their breasts also. The Grand Vizier came out to have a look around. In addition to the sumptuous gold fernery on his breast, he wore a jeweled star as large as the palm of my hand, and about his neck hung the Shah's miniature, reposing in a bed of diamonds, that gleamed and flashed in a wonderful way when touched by the sunlight. It was said that to receive the Shah's portrait from the Shah was the highest compliment that could be conferred upon a Persian subject. I did not care so much about the diamonds, but I would have liked to have the portrait very much. The Grand Vizier's sword hilt and the whole back of the sheath from end to end were composed of a neat and simple 48 combination, of some 12 or 15,000 emeralds and diamonds. Impressing a Persian general. Several of the Persians talked French and English. One of them, who was said to be a general, came up on the bridge where some of us were standing, pointed to a sailor, and asked me if I could tell him what that sailor was doing. I said he was communicating with the other ships by means of the optical telegraph that, by using the three sticks, the whole alphabet could be expressed. I showed him how A, B, and 100 were made, and so forth. Good, this Persian was impressed. He showed it by his eyes, by his gestures, by his manifest surprise and delight. I said to myself, if the Shah were only here now, the grand desire of Great Britain could be accomplished. The general immediately called the other grandees and told them about this telegraphic wonder. Then he said, "Now does everyone on board acquire this knowledge?" "No, only the officers." "And this sailor?" "He is only the signalman. 2 or 3 sailors on board are detailed for this service, and by order and direction of the officers, they communicate with the other ships." "Very good, very fine, very great indeed." These men were unquestionably impressed. I got 49 the sailor to bring the signal book, and the matter was fully explained, to their high astonishment, also the flag signals, and likewise the lamp signals for night telegraphing. Of course, the idea came into my head in the first place to ask one of the officers to conduct this bit of instruction, but I at once dismissed it. I judged that this would all go to the Shah sooner or later. I had come over on purpose to impress the Shah, and I was not going to throw away my opportunity. I wished the Queen had been there. I would have been knighted, sure. You see, they knight people here for all sorts of things, knight them, or put them into the peerage and make great personages of them. Now, for instance, a king comes over here on a visit. The Lord Mayor and sheriffs do him becoming honors in the city, and straightway the former is created a baronet, and the latter are knighted. When the Prince of Wales recovered from his illness, one of his chief physicians was made a baronet, and the other was knighted. Charles Roman, too, made duchesses of 1 or 2 female acquaintances of his for something or other, I have forgotten now what it was. A London shoemaker's apprentice became a great soldier indeed. A Wellington won prodigious victories in many climes, and covered the British arms with glory all through a long life. And when he was 187 years old, they knighted him, and made him constable of the Tower. But he died next year, and they buried him in Westminster Abbey. There is no telling what that man might have become if he had lived. So you see what a chance I had, for I have no doubt in 50 the world that I have been the humble instrument, under Providence, of impressing the Shah. And I really believe that if the Queen comes to hear of it, I shall be made a duke. Friends intending to write will not need to be reminded that a duke is addressed as Your Grace. It is considered a great offense to leave that off. A picturesque naval spectacle. When we were a mile or so out from Ostend, conversation ceased, an expectant look came into all faces, and opera glasses began to stand out from above all noses. This impressive hush lasted a few minutes, and then someone said, "There's they are." "Where?" "Away yonder, ahead, straight ahead." Which was true. 3 huge shapes smothered in the haze, the Vanguard, the Audacious, and the Devastation, all great ironclads. They were to do escort duty. The officers and correspondents gathered on the forecastle and waited for the next act. A red spout of fire issued from the Vanguard's side, another flashed from the Audacious. Beautiful these red tongues were against the dark haze. Then there was a long pause, ever so long a pause, and not a sound, not the suspicion of a sound. And now, out of the stillness, came a deep, solemn boom, boom. It had not occurred to me that at so great a distance I would not hear the report as soon as I saw the flash. The 2 crimson jets were very beautiful, 51, but not more so than the rolling volumes of white smoke that plunged after them, rested a moment over the water, and then went wreathing and curling up among the webbed rigging and the tall masts, and left only glimpses of these things visible, high up in the air, projecting as if from a fog. Now the flashes came thick and fast from the black sides of both vessels. The muffled thunders of the guns mingled together in one continued roll. The 2 ships were lost to sight, and in their places 2 mountains of tumbled smoke rested upon the motionless water, their bases in the hazy twilight and their summits shining in the sun. It was good to be there and see so fine a spectacle as that. The naval salute. We closed up fast upon the ironclads. They fell apart to let our flotilla come between, and as the Vigilant ranged up, the rigging of the ironclads was manned to salute the Shah. And, indeed, that was something to see. The The shrouds, from the decks clear to the trucks, away up toward the sky, were black with men. On the lower rounds of these rope ladders, they stood 5 abreast, holding each other's hands, and so the tapering shrouds formed attenuated pyramids of humanity. 6 pyramids of them towering into the upper air, and clear up on the top of each dizzy mast stood a little creature like a clothes pin, a mere black peg against the sky, and that might was a sailor waving a flag like a postage stamp. All at once the pyramids of men burst into a cheer, 52, and followed it with 2 more, given with a will, and if the Shah was not impressed, he must be the offspring of a mummy. And just at this moment, while we all stood there gazing, however, breakfast was announced, and I did not wait to see. The 34-ton guns speak. If there is one thing that is pleasanter than another, it is to take breakfast in the wardroom with a dozen naval officers. Of course, that awe-inspiring monarch, the captain, is aft, keeping frozen state with the grand viziers when there are any on board, and so there is nobody in the wardroom to maintain naval etiquette. As a consequence, none is maintained. One officer, in a splendid uniform, snatches a champagne bottle from a steward and opens it himself. Another keeps the servants moving. Another opens soda. Everybody eats, drinks, shouts, laughs in the most unconstrained way, and it does seem a pity that ever the thing should come to an end. No individual present seemed sorry he was not in the ship with the Shah. When the festivities had been going on about an hour, some tremendous booming was heard outside. Now here was a question between duty and broiled chicken. What might that booming mean? Anguish sat upon the faces of the correspondents. I watched to see what they would do, and the precious moments were flying. Somebody cried down a companionway. 53, the devastation is saluting. The correspondents tumbled over one another, over chairs, over everything in their frenzy to get on deck, and the last gun reverberated as the last heel disappeared on the stairs. The devastation, the pride of England, the mightiest war vessel afloat, carrying guns that outweigh any metal in any service, it is said 35 tons each, and these boys had missed that spectacle. At least I knew that some of them had. I did not go. Age has taught me wisdom. If a spectacle is going to be particularly imposing, I prefer to see it through somebody else's eyes, because that man will always exaggerate. Then I can exaggerate his exaggeration, and my account of the thing will be the most impressive. But I felt that I had missed my figure this time, because I was not sure which of these gentlemen reached the deck in time for a glimpse and which didn't. And this morning I cannot tell by the London papers. They all have imposing descriptions of that thing, and no one of them resembles another. Mr. Tens is perhaps the finest, but he was singing a song about spring, spring, gentle spring, all through the bombardment, and was overexcited, I fear. The next best was Mr. Wise, but he was telling about how he took a Russian battery, along with another man, during the Crimean War, and he was not fairly through the story till the salute was over, though I remember he went up and saw the smoke. I will not frame a description of the devastation's 54 salute, for I have no material that I can feel sure is reliable. The grand spectacular climax. When we first sailed away from Ostend, I found myself in a dilemma. I had no notebook. But any port in a storm, as the sailors say. I found a fair, full pack of ordinary playing cards in my overcoat pocket. One always likes to have something along to amuse children, within really they proved excellent to take notes on, although bystanders were a bit inclined to poke fun at them and ask facetious questions. But I was content. I made all the notes I needed. The aces and low, spot cards are very good indeed to write memoranda on, but I will not recommend the kings and jacks. Speaking by the cards, referring to the 7 of hearts, I find that this naval exhibition and journey from Ostend to Dover is going to cost the government £500,000. Got it from a correspondent. It is a round sum. Referring to the ace of diamonds, I find that along in the afternoon we sighted a fresh fleet of men of war coming to meet us. The rest of the diamonds, down to the 8 spot, 9s and 10s are no good for notes, are taken up with details of that spectacle. Most of the clubs and hearts refer to 55 matters immediately following that, but I really can hardly do anything with them because I have forgotten what was trumps. The spectacle. But never mind. The sea scene grew little by little, until presently it was very imposing. We drew up into the midst of a waiting host of vessels, enormous 5-masted men of war, great turret ships, steam packets, pleasure yachts, every sort of craft. Indeed, the sea was thick with them. The yards and riggings of the warships loaded with men, the packets crowded with people, the pleasure ships rainbowed with brilliant flags all over and over, some with flags strung thick on lines stretching from bowsprit to foremast, thence to mainmast, thence to mizzenmast, and thence to stern. All the ships were in motion gliding hither and thither, in and out, mingling and parting a bewildering whirl of flash and color. Our leader, the vast, black, ugly, but very formidable devastation, plowed straight through the gay throng, our Shaw ships following, the lines of big men of war saluting, the booming of the guns drowning the cheering, stately islands of smoke towering everywhere. And so, in this condition of unspeakable grandeur, we swept into the harbor of Dover, and saw the English princes and the long ranks of red-coated soldiers waiting on the pier, civilian multitudes behind them, the lofty hill front by the castle swarming with spectators, and there was the crash of cannon and a general hurrah 56 all through the air. It was rather a contrast to silent Ostend and the unimpressible Flanders. The Shah impressed at last. The Duke of Edinburgh and Prince Arthur received the Shah in state, and then all of us princes, Shahs, ambassadors, grand viziers, and newspaper correspondents climbed aboard the train and started off to London just like so many brothers. From Dover to London, it was a sight to see. 70 miles of human beings in a jam. The gaps were not worth mentioning, and every man, woman, and child waving hat or handkerchief and cheering. I wonder, could not tell, could not be sure, could only wonder, would this impress the Shah? I would have given anything to know. But well, it ought, but still one could not tell. And by we burst into the London railway station, a very large station it is, and found it wonderfully decorated, and all the neighboring streets packed with cheering citizens. Would this impress the Shah? Well, I could not yet feel certain. The Prince of Wales received the Shah. You should have seen how gorgeously the Shah was dressed. Now he was like the sun in a total eclipse of rainbows. Yes. The prince received him, put him in a grand open carriage, got in and made him sit over further and not crowd. The carriage clattered out of the station. All London fell apart on either side and lifted a perfectly national cheer. And just at that instant the bottom fell out of 57, the sky and 40 deluges came pouring down at once. The great strain was over, the crushing suspense at an end. I said, thank God, this will impress the Shah. Now came the long files of horse guards in silver armor. We took the great Persian to Buckingham Palace. I never stirred till I saw the gates open and close upon him with my own eyes, and knew he was there. Then I said, England, here is your Shah, take him and be happy, but don't ever ask me to fetch over another one. This contract has been pretty straining on me. Chapter 3. The Shah as a Social Star. London, June 21, 1873. After delivering the Shah at the gates of that unsightly pile of dreary grandeur known as Buckingham Palace, I cast all responsibility for him aside for the time being, and experienced a sense of relief and likewise an honest pride in my success, such as no man can feel who has not had a Shah at nurse, so to speak, for 3 days. It is said by those who ought to know that, when Buckingham Palace was being fitted up as a home for the Shah, one of the chief rooms was adorned with a rich carpet, which had been designed and manufactured especially to charm the eye of His Majesty. The story goes on to say that a couple of 58, the Persian suite, came here a week ago to see that all things were in readiness and nothing overlooked, and that when they reached that particular room and glanced at the lovely combination of green figures and white ones in that carpet, they gathered their robes carefully up about their knees, and then went elaborately tiptoeing about the floor, with the aspect and anxiety of a couple of cats hunting for dry ground in a wet country, and they stepped only on the white figures, and almost fainted whenever they came near touching a green one. It is said that the explanation is that these visiting Persians are all Mohammedans, and green being a color sacred to the descendants of the Prophet, and none of these people being so descended, it would be dreadful profanation for them to defile the holy color with their feet. And the general result of it all was that carpet had to be taken up and is a dead loss. Man is a singular sort of human being, after all, and his religion does not always adorn him. Now, our religion is the right one, and has fewer odd and striking features than any other. And yet my ancestors used to roast Catholics and witches and warm their hands by the fire. But they would be blanched with horror at the bare thought of breaking the Sabbath. And here is a Persian monarch who never sees any impropriety in chopping a subject's head off for the mere misdemeanor of calling him too early for breakfast, and yet would be consumed with pious remorse if unheeding foot were to chance to step upon anything so green as you or I, my reader. 59 Oriental peoples say that women have no souls to save, and almost without my memory, many American Protestants said the same of babies. I thought there was a wide gulf between the Persians and ourselves, but I begin to feel that they are really our brothers after all. After a day's rest, the Shah went to Windsor Castle and called on the Queen. What that suggests to the reader's mind is this: that the Shah took a hand satchel and an umbrella, called a cab, and said he wanted to go to the Paddington station. That when he arrived there, the driver charged him sixpence too much, and he paid it rather than have trouble. That he tried now to buy a ticket, and was answered by a ticket seller as surly as a hotel clerk that he was not selling tickets for that train yet. That he finally got his ticket and was beguiled of his satchel by a railway porter at once, who put it into a first-class carriage and got a sixpence, which the company forbids him to receive. That presently when the guard or conductor of the train came along, the Shah slipped a shilling into his hand and said he wanted to smoke, and straightway the guard signified that it was all right. That when the Shah arrived at Windsor Castle, he rang the bell, and when the girl came to the door asked her if the Queen was at home, and she left him standing in the hall and went to see. That by and by she returned, and said would he please sit down in the front room and Mrs. Guelph would be down directly. That he hung his hat on the hat rack, stood his umbrella up in the corner, entered the front room and sat down on a 60 haircloth chair. That he waited and got tired. That he got up and examined the old piano, the depressing lithographs on the walls, and the album of photographs of faded country relatives on the center table, and was just about to fall back on the family Bible, when the Queen entered briskly and begged him to sit down and apologized for keeping him waiting, but she had just got a new girl and everything was upside down, and so forth and so on. But how are the family, and when did he arrive, and how long should he stay, and why didn't he bring his wife? I knew that that was the picture which would spring up in the American reader's mind when it was said the Shah went to visit the Queen, because that was the picture which the announcement suggested to my own mind. But it was far from the facts, very far. Nothing could be farther. In truth, these people made as much of a to-do over a mere friendly call as anybody else would over a conflagration. There were special railway trains for the occasion. There was a general muster of princes and dukes to go along, each one occupying roue. There were regiments of cavalry to clear the way. Railway stations were turned into flower gardens, sheltered with flags and all manner of gaudy splendor. There were multitudes of people to look on over the heads of interminable ranks of policemen, standing shoulder to shoulder and facing front. There was braying of music and booming of cannon. All that fuss, in sober truth, over a mere offhand friendly caw. Imagine what it would have been if he had brought another shirt and was going to stay a month. At the Guildhall, truly, I am like to suffocate with astonishment at the things that are going on around me here. It is all odd, it is all queer enough, I can tell you. But last night's work transcends anything I ever heard of in the way of, well, how shall I express it? How can I word it? I find it awkward to get at it. But to say it in a word end, it is a true one, too. As hundreds and hundreds of people will testify last night, the corporation of the City of London, with a simplicity and ignorance which almost rise to sublimity, actually gave a ball to a Shah who does not dance. If I would allow myself to laugh at a cruel mistake, this would start me. It is the oddest thing that has happened since I have had charge of the Shah. There is some excuse for it in the fact that the aldermen of London are simply great and opulent merchants, and cannot be expected to know much about the ways of high life, but then they could have asked some of us who have been with the Shah. The ball was a marvel in its way. The historical Guildhall was a scene of great magnificence. There was a high dais at one end, on which were three state chairs under a sumptuous canopy. Upon the middle one sat the Shah, who was almost a Chicago conflagration of precious stones and gold bullion lace. Among other gems upon his breast were a number of emeralds of marvelous size, and fro a loop hung an historical diamond of great size and wonderful beauty. On the right of the Shah sat the Princess of Wales, and on his left the wife of the Crown Prince of Russia. Grouped about the three stood a full jury of minor princes, princesses, and ambassadors hailing from many countries. The two corrals. The immense hall was divided in the middle by a red rope. The Shah's division was sacred to blue blood, and there was breathing room there, but the other corral was but a crush of struggling and perspiring humanity. The place was brilliant with gas, and was a rare spectacle in the matter of splendid costumes and rich coloring. The lofty stained glass windows, pictured with celebrated episodes in the history of the ancient city, were lighted from the outside, and one may imagine the beauty of the effect. The great giants, Gog and Magog, whose origin and history, curiously enough, are unknown even to tradition, looked down from the lofty gallery but made no observation. Down the long sides of the hall, with but brief spaces between, were imposing groups of marble statuary, and contrasted with the masses of life and color about them, they made a picturesque effect. The groups were statues in various attitudes of the Duke of Wellington. I do not say this knowingly, but only supposingly. But I never have seen a statue in England, yet that represented anybody but the Duke of Wellington, 63, and, as for the streets and terraces and courts and squares that are named after him, or after selections from his 797 titles, they are simply beyond the grasp of arithmetic. This reminds me that, having named everything after Wellington that there was left to name in England, even down to Wellington boots, our British brothers, still unsatisfied, still oppressed with adulation, blandly crossed over and named our Californian big trees Wellington, and put it in Latin at that. They did that, calmly ignoring the fact that we, the discoverers and owners of the trees, had long ago named them after a larger man. However, if the ghost of Wellington enjoys such a proceeding, possibly the ghost of Washington will not greatly trouble itself about the matter. But what really disturbs me is that, while Wellington is justly still in the fashion here, Washington is fading out of the fashion with us. It is not a good sign. The idols we have raised in his stead are not to our honor. Some little dancing was done in the sacred corral in front of the Shah by grandees belonging mainly to grace of God families, but he himself never agitated a foot. The several thousand commoner people on the other side of the rope could not dance any more than sardines in a box. Chances to view the Guildhall spectacle were so hungered for that people offered £5 for the privilege of standing 3 minutes in the musicians' gallery, and were refused. I cannot convey to you an idea of the inordinate desire, which prevails here to see the Shah better than by remarking that speculators, who held 4-seat 64 opera boxes at Covent Garden Theatre tonight, were able to get $250 for them. Had all the seats been sold at auction, the opera this evening would have produced not less than $125,000 in gold. I am below the figures rather than above them. The greatest house, for money, that America ever saw was gathered together upon the occasion of Jenny Lind's first concert at Castle Garden. The seats were sold at auction and produced something over $20,000. I am by no means trying to describe the Guildhall affair of last night. Such a crush of titled swells, such a bewildering array of jeweled uniforms and brilliant feminine costumes, such solemn and awful reception ceremonies in the library, such grim and stately imposing addresses and Persian replies, such imposing processional pageantry later on, such depressing dancing before the apathetic Shah, such ornate tables and imperial good cheer at the banquetet, makes a body tired to merely think of trying to put all that on paper. Perhaps you, sir, will be good enough to imagine it, and thus save one who respects you and honors you 5 columns of solid writing. The lunatic asylum is blessed with a glimpse. As regards the momentous occasion of the opera, this evening, I found myself in a grievous predicament for a Republican. The tickets were all sold long ago, so I must either go as a member of the royal family or not at all. After a good deal of 65 reflection, it seemed best not to mix up with that class, lest a political significance might be put upon it. But a queer arrangement had been devised whereby I might have a glimpse of the show, and I took advantage of that. There is an immense barn-like glass house attached to the rear of the theater, and that was fitted up with seats, carpets, mirrors, gas, columns, flowers, garlands, and a meager row of shrubs strung down the sides on brackets to create an imposing forest effect, I suppose. The place would seat 10 or 1,200 people. All but 100 paid $1.25 a seat for what? To look at the Shah 3/4 of a minute while he walked through to enter the theater. The remaining 100 paid $11 a seat for the same privilege, with the added luxury of rushing on the stage and glancing at the opera audience for 1 single minute afterward, while the chorus sung God Save the Queen. We are all gone mad, I do believe. 1,100 5-shilling lunatics and 100 2-guinea maniacs. The herald purchased a ticket and created me one of the latter, along with 2 or 3 more of the staff. Our cab was about number 17,342 in the string that worked its slow way through London and past the theater. The Shah was not to come till 9 o'clock, and yet we had to be at the theater by 6:30, or we would not get into the glass house at all, they said. We were there on time, and seated in a small gallery which overlooked a very brilliantly dressed throng of people. Every seat was occupied. We sat there 2 hours and a half gazing and melting. 66, the wide, red-carpeted central aisle below, offered good display ground for officials in fine uniforms, and they made good use of it. Royalty arrives,